All righty. Hi, everybody. My name is Jory Houlihan. I am your guide for the dopamine deprived. And I work with women who discover their ADHD in adulthood to help them connect the dots from who they spent their life thinking they were to better understanding how their brains work so that they can start to create skills and goals that will help them live up to their full potential with confidence. And I am super excited about today's guest. So, Kristi Huss is a mom of 6 daughters, including quadruplets. You heard that right. Her family literally doubled overnight. Like I can't even fathom that. She is also a wife and a business owner, and she fearlessly defies limits and proves that small town Iowa births big time ambitions. She is on a mission to empower others, reframing circumstances, overcoming overwhelm, and infusing joy and vibrant energy into the pursuit of dreams. Through her podcast, Momentum, which I highly recommend, by the way, speaking, coaching, and books, she guides individuals to break free from self-doubt and achieve their greatest potential. Known for her creative ideation and playful way with words, Kristi is the go-to expert for entrepreneurs seeking standout concepts, names, and titles. Leading her daughters by example, she fearlessly chases her own big goals and dreams, inspiring others to do the same. So thank you so much for being here, Kristi. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited about doing this and especially for your community because as you know, I'm one of them. So I look forward to it.
Yeah, so that actually brings me to my first question. So you and I met through a coaching program we did together, and I think it was around that time that you were starting to really realize that you had ADHD, but because you had raised 6 girls and had a successful travel business, and you wrote a book, and you like had all these great successes. On the surface, it looked like you had it all together. And I remember you even mentioned to me that it was because of those things that you thought, well, there's no way I could have this. So why don't you tell everyone kind of how that journey went for you, discovering that you in fact did have it?
Yeah, well, that's funny because I think even there is that, as you know, that misperception that you just all of a sudden found out you have it or you got it or something, which as we know, we've always had it. But I think for me, I think a lot of people maybe suspected it or maybe others suspected it. I had absolutely no clue. I just thought this is how I was and how I worked. And how I discovered it was probably it's a really a funny story that I'll share. It was my daughter, one of my daughters found out in middle school, we found out that she had ADHD. And I had kind of always had that stereotype. It was hyperactivity. It was things that I really didn't understand. And going through that process by doing a really deep dive and questionnaire and finding out from her teachers and kind of going through why she had ADHD or what the signs were, we discovered, we said, hey, to my husband, this is you. Like, this is totally you. So at the time, we kind of accepted that it was both my husband and my daughter. And I had always kind of known that, accepted that. I tried to dive in and learn a lot about it to best support them. And I just jokingly knowing and accepting that there is a site that I follow on Instagram. It's kind of like a funny, how do you know if you're married to somebody with ADHD? And it was like slides that you could go through. And I was going to read them in the car to my husband, just being like, haha, because I'm married to you. And I started reading them off. And every single one of them, I started to get slower because they applied to me. And it was like, okay, this is kind of scary. And the next week we went to our couples therapist because we still go to couples therapy. I highly recommend it. It's how we really stay on track. And I said something as a joke to him, like, can you believe that? And he's like, Kristi, I don't think that's a bad idea to look into. And it kind of shook me. And so my husband kind of said, yes, like his thought process too is maybe this is something you need to look at. And I did. I made an appointment, got a referral and made my appointment to go ultimately get my diagnosis.
So how did you feel when you got your diagnosis? Did it bring any kind of clarity or validation, or were you more confused or a little of all of that?
I don't think the clarity or validation at first, because I really didn't think of myself that way. For me, it was a lot more confusion. And the acceptance piece was really hard for me. Not that maybe I did kind of jokingly think in the back of my head that I had it all together. And I didn't think there was anything bad or wrong with having ADHD because clearly my husband and my daughter did, and I love them. But I always kind of thought that was a them thing, not a me thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so having to go back and kind of put those puzzle pieces together that this is who I am. And it kind of just kind of rediscovering this story that I thought of who I was, and that acceptance, I was extremely emotional about it. I mean, I remember the first times in her office, I don't feel like I'm a big crier. And every time I went in there to talk about the questions that we would go through, and whether or not to start medication, all those things, I got very emotional about it. So it was not an easy process, but it was one that was worth getting through and accepting.
Did you find that, because it sounds like you definitely went through a grieving process, was there ever like anger in that, resentment, anything like that? That was me. So I'm
Uh,
always curious.
Absolutely. I think that was part of that. I think just because some of those things that I thought were just about me, um, always this kind of feeling that I wanted to fit in, but never fit in. And really now I look at it, I really don't even want to fit in. But it's just kind of that, just finding people to relate to. Now I look more of it as relating to rather than fitting in. And things that I would do or say, I felt like were kind of out there, and people, it was just really hard to be understood. And even the girl that was always sitting in the front of the class with the naughty boys because I talked too much and all of this stuff, I kind of look at it, I did okay in school, but I just wonder how differently things would have been, how maybe I wouldn't have taken to me in my 40s or almost 50 to figure this out, that maybe I could have done things a lot differently.
Yeah, I think that is the what might have beens is a very real part of being diagnosed late, and I definitely went through that too. And so yeah, so for any of you watching and you're experiencing that, I just want you to know you're definitely not alone in that. It's
And I,
important to go through that, but it's also important to not get stuck in it.
right. And if I can just share something really interesting, I am a person of faith. And so even through my faith and going through that, my husband and I started going to a different church, and it's a little bit of a drive, but I just really enjoyed it. And they recently, and they're still in doing a series on mental health and talking about, just because you're a person of faith doesn't mean you're not going to struggle or have these things. And really, it was just such a relief. And I thought to myself, even there, I walked out of the first one and I was kind of angry. And I thought, where was this message 35 years ago? Or what if I would have
Mhm.
heard it then and felt like, okay, this is okay to be experiencing something a little bit different. So I think I'm glad that it's a lot more open, that people are talking about it and not looking upon it as a shameful thing anymore.
I totally agree, especially because there is so much going on in terms of mental health with untreated ADHD. Depression, anxiety are very common side effects of untreated ADHD. And that's often what women are diagnosed with first.
Mhm.
And then when the meds aren't quite working, then sometimes the doctor will go, oh, well, maybe we'll look at ADHD. Um, but I think the fact that we can be so much more open about it than we could when we were younger, that just gives me so much hope for the future.
Mhm.
So, so you mentioned that you had mentioned to me that the relationship with your husband and your daughter that was diagnosed with ADHD in middle school has changed since your diagnosis. And would you mind sharing what that experience has been like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to, because if there are people that you have, not only yourself, but you have family members that have ADHD or even other things that they're struggling with. To me, I didn't know, obviously, when my daughter had ADHD, and after we discovered it, she had a great therapist. She would kind of talk to me before and after, so she would tell me how to best parent her, because some of the things I was doing, I needed to be doing the opposite. And I felt like she's always been a strong-willed child, and she and I, out of any of them, we really butt heads. We really would struggle as she was growing up. And now that I realize it myself, I realize there's so many more similarities to just even the littlest of things. And now I can encourage her and support her differently. And just today, she sent me a snap. She's starting an internship at a horse at a she's into animal science and pre-vet, and she was showing this pony that was really out of control and being like mad pony and stuff. And I kind of said, boy, I bet that pony didn't know he was up against this. You're more stubborn than that pony. And she said, yes, he did. And it was funny. So now I can look at it and realize these are also things about me. We were talking about even how our love of music and how we get we see and hear things differently. My husband the same, and that's really actually I think one of the things that we connected on when we first started dating. And it's kind of going back to that, knowing it's not just this commonality, but we do maybe see things and hear things a little bit differently. And now instead of maybe fighting against that, we really encourage that and bring the best out of each other.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Um, yeah, it's really interesting when you start to go, I wonder if this is part of my ADHD, and that actually was one of the things when we spoke before. You were telling me what the thing that I now call your quirky cool thing. And I think everyone who is neurodivergent actually has a quirky cool thing. Not everybody knows what it is yet, though. It's typically, and I think this was your experience with it as well, is we tend to hold it a little close to the chest because we think it makes us odd, right? Or that there's something weird about us or whatever. And so we don't necessarily share it with the world. And it isn't until we become a little bit more confident in our ADHD or other neurodivergencies that we kind of go, hey, this is kind of my thing, right? So why don't you discovered yours in a Facebook group. So tell everybody how that kind of came to be. Whoop.
Yeah, so I have always, since I've been younger, been very different when it comes to words. And I thought it was just the creative writer in me. And when I was younger, I used to write a lot, enter competitions, and I loved that. But even when I would hear music or songs, I would tweak things a little bit and change a song or a jingle, or I'd be like, oh, they should do it this way. And things would just come to me. And I did actually go into college to start in a career in journalism and writing, and I had some bad experiences with a professor really just critiquing my work. And so I switched gears, but I secretly always wanted to write. And I thought that was just writing, which I do love to write. And I have written books since then. But I have been in some groups with a lot of entrepreneurs and people that are wanting to start a podcast or write a book like me. And I would just offer my thoughts and suggestions on things. And people would be like, oh, there, you did it again. You did it again. And I spoke one day and I said, I'm thinking about doing this as a service and just like a brand amplifier and helping people come up with their names of their podcast books or coaching programs or whatever it is. And people were in the chat were saying, you should do it. You should do it. And the next day, three people private messaged me and said, are you going to do that thing? Because I want to work with you. And it was kind of strange because I thought there's this thing where I come up with a word or something. And sometimes in the wrong space, people look at you like, what are you talking about? But in the right way, I learned that this could be something that I could really help others with because not everybody thinks that way.
Well, one of my favorite words that I love that you told me about was procrastinating, which anyone who has ADHD knows exactly what that is without even needing a definition. Yeah, you said that, and I bring it up, and I'm like, and I always give you credit. I'm like, Kristi comes up. This is just like my favorite word when it comes to how we procrastinate. When we take all these courses, or we're just like, and we do the deep dive into something, and it's just a way of avoiding doing something we're supposed to be doing. But I love that word. And I think that's such a great example of some of the, like your creativity with words. And when we were talking about this, that was one of the things that just like made me so happy for you. Like, because you had said, I just always kind of kept it to myself. But then I was like, oh, hey, I could really help people with this. And to see you kind of coming into your own with it and like really starting to embrace the quirky cool things about yourself and just like who you are with it, it just makes my heart so happy. Because so many of us spend our lives trying to hide a lot of who we are, right? Masking, etc. And when we get this diagnosis, all of a sudden we're kind of like, well, now I kind of don't know who I am. And it's definitely a journey. And so when I see people who have been able to work through that journey and who are finding these really cool things about themselves and really starting to own it, I just love that, because when you are able to be open about that, it gives other people permission to do that. Wouldn't you agree? I think that it does.
Absolutely. And I think part of that acceptance piece of not only accepting that I have ADHD, but also accepting that this is a gift, not some weird, quirky, weird thing about me, now I'm able to not only use it like to help others and do it as a business, let's say, but as I wrote my first book, and I even thinking back, people like, oh, I love the name, because my first book was about the empty nest, and I call it empty besting, because I like to take a word and make it something that is meaningful or helpful to me. And then I did the same thing with the podcast Momentum, meaning like just keep going, and how you can gain steam and speed and
Yeah.
gain more success. So people would give me feedback like that, but not knowing that that was really something that was really a strength of mine. And so now the new book that I'm writing is very much using the way I play with words in that way. And people can connect with it, or maybe they won't. Maybe it will be the ADHD community that loves the book because I play with words like that. But now I'm able to actually like really draw out the best of me that maybe I would have thought, okay, people aren't going to get that, or that's weird. Now I've accepted that. And now I think, and I love seeing that in other people too. And like other moms and other women, when they do that, that whatever that strength is that maybe they're trying to hide because they're trying to fit in, or they're trying to do what they think people should expect from them. But when they're able to do that, I'm like, not everybody can do those strengths. And a lot of times I feel like the things that we look at that we're maybe envious of others. And it's like, well, that might be their strength. That might not be mine. But somebody might
Mhm.
look at that and be like, well, I wish I could do that. So and when people can find that out for themselves, they're able to just use it in a whole new way, whatever they want to do.
Yeah, when I do my my master classes, I use a quote that up until recently I thought Albert Einstein had said it, but apparently no one knows who said it. But essentially, it says, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will spend its whole life believing that it is stupid. And I tell the women in this workshop, you have spent your whole life trying to climb trees, and you're just now finding out you're a fish. And so you're going to be finding out all these really cool things about yourself. And so, and even though you can't climb a tree, you can do things that people who climb trees can't do. And neither of them is better or worse. They're just different in you. And really learning to embrace that. So I say now, like, embrace your inner fish, because it's just such an amazing thing to really kind of come into your own and stop the masking, and really be true to who you are. And that is something that I really, really want for women with ADHD, because we have spent so much of our life trying to, because, people pleasing, also one of our things, and perfectionism. So when you can kind of let that go and just be yourself, it's just a great thing. So,
Yeah,
so exciting.
it is a weight that's lifted off, and not only being able to step into the best version of yourself, but like then helping acknowledge and support other people to do the same. Because when we're not trying it, or we're not judging ourselves, and we're not judging others, then people have that. Because I think the masking for me, because of the talks too much tendency and the strange words and concepts that come to my head, I say them. And if you get some strange reaction, you're immediately like, oh, don't do that. Like, don't do that. Keep that in here. Nobody else is thinking that or hearing that same tune that you are. And so by being in groups and support groups like yours, where we know that we all have something like that, it's very freeing. And sometimes you do need to be in the right circles and around the right people. And they're out there. I mean, especially in today's world with Zoom, we can find them. So
Yes.
even if you have those people, because like for me, my immediate family, like my mom and my sisters, um, they know it because I talk about it in my podcast. I've talked about it, but we've never really acknowledged it. It's not something we even talk about. So, but there are places like here I can freely talk about it, and I'm not going to hide it anymore, in the hopes that I can help other women do the same. So even if you're in circles where you think that it's not going to be okay, or people don't want to acknowledge it or hear it, there still are places and people that will.
Yes. Yes. And I think too, because there are so many more people getting their diagnosis, because so many women were missed, and so many of them are finding out now. I think there's just more conversation about ADHD and what comes with ADHD. And so I think it's helping women be more brave about talking about it. And which actually kind of it segues into my next question for you. So you mentioned before, like when your daughter was getting assessed, and you had these misconceptions that, it was hyperactivity and boys and whatever. Um, what other like misconceptions or stereotypes about ADHD did you have to confront once you were diagnosed? And were they your misconceptions, or was it ones that were kind of put on you by other people, or both?
It's definitely both. I mean, I grew up in a very, I still live in a very kind of conservative small town area, and there's some really wonderful things about that. But it's kind of like there's a standard norm of how everyone should be. And I'm sure there's a lot more people that struggle with stuff. We just don't wear it on our sleeve. It's very rare. So I would say just having to let go of that and know that we don't have to be that way, and that's not really sustainable or real. And by fighting so hard for my daughter when she found that out, and then just becoming a real advocate about how she had to learn, how she had to be, and had to do things differently, because the therapist that she had was so good at like training me, but I didn't know that I was going to need that for myself. And I think the biggest misconception, I think, for me is I thought the way I did things and the way I am was because I'm a busy mom. And obviously I'm a really busy mom. When I had the quads, I I structured and organized. Color coding is huge for me. I color code those kids. I mean, their stuff, and they still joke about it. We still have certain colors. And so I think the misperceptions were I did these things because I was a busy mom, and this is how I had to operate. And in working with the psychiatrist I had, she said, these were like some amazing coping skills that you had. And when it came to your kids and your family, the managing of your family was so important, because that's my job. I'm not going to mess up with my kids. But when it came to managing myself, and like when they left the house, I was totally lost. And it didn't matter if they were out of the house or not. I still had a really hard time managing my time. I still was busy. I still didn't know how to do that. I was good at doing it for them, but not so good at doing it for myself. So I think just that misconception that, well, I was just a busy mom and that's just the way I'm made, but really it was there all along. And I found these ways to cope, even though I didn't even know it at the time. Even when I wrote my book, the book coach I had at the time, she said, I have never worked with somebody that's structured. And it was just because I had to have this template and framework for everything. But before I even had my diagnosis, that's how I work and that's how I get things done.
Mhm.
So that has been a huge freeing factor for me now, knowing it's not weird or strange about me. Or if somebody says, well, I've never seen anybody work that way. Well, that is because I have ADHD, and those are the ways that work for me. And now I can even tweak them to make them work even better for me.
Yes. Yeah. Um, and I think the more we dive into, our own ADHD, and we really start to figure out what those strengths are, what those challenges are, we can start to really figure out how our brains work, and then create coping strategies that really start to work way better. Because we typically tend to try and do what everybody else does to manage time, right? And to be organized. And it just doesn't work for most of us, right? So, and it can make, and so that just kind of keeps on to, the feeling of inadequacy and I'm not good enough, and the low self-esteem that tends to come with women who are undiagnosed for a long period of time. So what
Can
oh, go ahead.
I well, just along those lines, I want to share real quick, because even though it's about my daughter, I think it really leads into what you were saying. Is when she was going through her diagnosis at the time, she always framed herself as the bad one, as the one that was always in trouble, and she would say that, and that hurt me so bad. But I realized, I was parenting them so much the same, even though I knew they were different. And because I learned you do have to do things differently, like the therapist told me, she was always scribbling. Like I'd say, sit still. Like we'd be in church and she'd be like, that is the worst thing you could ask her to do. This is how she intakes her information. And even going through high school, her teachers would say, oh, she's a great student, but that's how she takes in her information. She knows what she's doing. So that is a prime example of I tried to have her sit still like the rest of my girls, or even for me, I'm trying to do things like other people, but they don't work for you. And then you're telling yourself you're bad or you're not good because you can't do it the same way. So I learned that through her, but then now I have to do that to myself as well.
Yes, and we were talking about how your daughter and my daughter seem very similar in that respect. My daughter's always doodling. It's like part of her 504 actually is that she can doodle during class because that's one of the things that helps her focus. But if you don't know that, you think she's just like not paying attention or whatever. So thankfully, I think IEPs and 504s have also come a long way since they used to, because now they better understand that like not everybody learns the same way. So
Mhm.
yeah, so that's awesome. So, as a woman who discovered your ADHD later in life, what advice would you give other women who suspect they may have it, but haven't sought a diagnosis yet?
I would encourage them just to check it out, because even if you are joking about, even if you don't even know it, and but you think there may be something that's off, or thing for me it was exhaustion and just the overthinking, over analyzing, and maybe not knowing that these may be signs. I mean, it's not like you WebMD or Google everything, but just knowing maybe there's something off to, and not always take that first. If you go somewhere and somebody says, "Oh, it must be depression or whatever," because I knew that wasn't going on with me. I was able to get a lot of things done, but it was exhausting, and it was hard to just stop myself from doing that. So if you are feeling that way and knowing that there is a different way to do it, and not only a different way to do it, but one that you can actually enjoy it and just feel lighter, and maybe unlock that little best quirky, cool, best self that you have. And I would absolutely encourage you to do it, and know that when you're going to do it too, it's not going to be like overnight, like, well, I'm good now, I got it. And maybe that happens for people, but I would assume that you're going to have to go through this a little bit of an identity shift and acceptance to feel confident in that and really own it and really get to that other side. But it is worth it.
Yes, I could not agree more. I feel that I get a lot of people in the I'm 99% sure category. I'm like, how does that 1% feel to you?
Mm,
And almost always they're like heavy. Because I know for myself, when I was in that 99% category, I was just like, well, that 1% is the difference between I have a brain difference that is the reason why I think differently and work differently than other people, or I'm really just a lazy person who needs to get her act together. And and even after I was diagnosed, I still had this thought of, what if they were wrong? What
mm.
if I really am just lazy? And I think, oh my God, like, why is it easier for me to believe that then I have ADHD? Like, that's just crazy to me. And I know so many women who've done the same thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is insane. But I think getting the diagnosis, if you can, it gives you validation that what you've been noticing about yourself is real. And it also opens up tools for you that you don't have otherwise, right? So, some people opt to do meds. I've done meds, and they completely changed my life. But I was very resistant in the beginning, and then I started them. I was like, oh, I really wish I would have done this sooner. Other people can't do medication, or don't want to, and so, but if you know what you're dealing with, then you know that you can find a more streamlined way, even with an ADHD brain, to help you work it, whether you're on medication or not. And that knowledge is so important. So I agree completely, Chrissy, that getting that diagnosis is really important if you can do it. I know it
And
can be very costly for some
yeah,
people. So I know that for some people it's price prohibitive, but if you can, it's absolutely worth doing.
I was going to say, and something I just thought of too, not only for yourself, but for other people. It's going to help your relationship with other people, whether you choose to tell them or not. It's just your knowing. But I would say things that I would kind of beat myself up for, be strange about me. Now my friends can be like, okay, we get it a little bit. I used to get up and I'd always leave the fridge open, and I'd go and I'd grab stuff, and then I'd come back out and everybody'd be staring at me and be like, oh yeah, I left the fridge open. Or my husband says all the time, like, we would come out of any store and I didn't even get it. He would just like kind of grab my shoulder and we go, I never remember where I parked. Or I'd call my kids, oh, I know I didn't shut the curling iron off. Now I don't do those things anymore. And it was like those things. So other people can understand whether I do them or not. They understand that's part of me. And it's not just, oh, Christy's losing it, or that these are things about me, and they can understand and relate to me. So maybe they're not going to be frustrated. And then I'm going to be frustrated because I'm trying to hide it or trying to not be that way.
That brings up a really, yeah, that's a really good point. My husband, he has some ADHD tendencies, but his OCD definitely shows up more. So he lives with three people who don't don't see their messes, and he sees all of them. And he always kind of thought it was just an excuse, but then when he started to see the same types of patterns with me and both my kids, and even though all three of us have ADHD and being both my kids, we all look very different from each other in terms of how it shows up. And yet we still have patterns like leaving cabinet doors and drawers open, things like that, right? My husband's like, God, this really is a thing, isn't it? Like, why don't you shut the door? I'm like, I don't know. I don't think to. And there was something else you said, and now I can't remember what it was. Oh, and one of the bigger challenges for me is out of sight, out of mind. And that includes people. I will literally forget people exist if I don't see them physically or at least Zoom-y on a regular basis. And when I finally learned about that, I started to educate people in my life. Like, if you notice you haven't heard from me in a while, would you mind just reaching out? I also put together strategies to remember to reach out to them. But sometimes I miss a reminder or whatever, and then I have all this guilt, and then I feel shame because I didn't reach out again, and blah blah blah. So now they better understand that aspect of who I am. So they're not going, God, she must not like me. She never calls me or whatever. Now they are better able to understand that, and so it makes our friendships work better. So
They can
so I
help you.
yeah.
They can really like help you instead of like not thinking, oh, feeling offended if you didn't call them or whatever. My friends, I'm a travel agent by day and I travel all over. And my friends would kind of jokingly be like, I have a phone full of room numbers because I take a picture when I leave my room out of because I always have my phone with me and I can't ever remember what my room numbers don't stick for me. But
Mhm.
like, if we're by the pool during the day and they're playing music trivia, I will kill it. I will get every single song. That is something I remember, but I can't remember my room number. But now then my friends can be like, oh, jokingly, like you're on the same floor as me, or this is the way we go because they know that about me and they can help me. And of course, they want me on their team for music trivia because I'm going to win. So,
Exactly. They are not going to let that opportunity slide. So,
yeah.
all right. So, what would you say has been the most significant positive impact of understanding and managing your ADHD? Like, how has it changed your life for the better?
I think in every single, I could probably name something in every single aspect of my life, but I won't. But I would say the relational aspect is huge. I think being able to better understand myself so that I can relate to others better, or they can relate to me. I think that's made a world of difference. I have a lot less frustration and resentment because I don't have to try so hard. And then I would say just more courage and more bravery. I've always felt like I've been trying to go out of my comfort zone and do some kind of big things, but now I can lean into that a lot more. And just that acceptance of this is who I am. I don't have any doubts anymore. And I'm allowing that to really amplify my whatever I do in my creative realm, in my speaking. And I still love what I'm doing in travel and helping people in that aspect, but I'm able to start helping people in a whole new way, which if I'd been hiding that part of me, um, that would be a shame. And for other people that are hiding some of those best things that maybe can help like one or two people. I mean, even if it's your family, me having a better relationship with my daughter, and I mean all my kids, I just really feel like it's just been helpful in every single aspect of my life.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I agree that very often we tend to focus on the challenges and the struggles we have. And that partially because that's what leads us to getting a diagnosis, right? But it is so important to also recognize what your strengths are because those strengths are going to be the things you lean on to help you with the challenges. And, ADHD is, there's no cure for it. You'll have it for your whole life. So when you can really find the things that really make you tick and really give you joy and really bring out like your best talents, I think it is just such a gift to the world. And it's one of the reasons I do what I do, because I get frustrated when I think about how much potential has been left on the table over the years because women were missed. And I really want women to come into their own and just like knock it out of the park, you know? And
Mm.
so I'm just, yeah. So I am so thrilled that you are on here today and telling your story, because I think you have such a great story and you have such a great positive attitude. And so thank you so much for joining me today. It really, I just cannot wait to see what your future holds, because you got so much good stuff going on.
Well, thank you for having me and letting me share my story. And trust me, it hasn't always been, I'm smiling now, but trust me, there was plenty of time of tears. So it's not always that way, but it's so worth it. And it feels so good. So I just am very happy for what you're doing and the work that you're doing so that people can have that acceptance and really elevate to their next level. So thank you for doing what you do.
You. Thank you. So if you guys want to be able to reach out to Kristi, I'm going to put her links in the description. And so you will be able to reach out and connect with her. So thank you again, Kristi, for being on here. I know that you have, I'm sure that you have inspired a lot of people with your story. And I always want to make sure that women know that they're not alone. And you have just one of the best examples of what a lot of women have experienced, and you coming out the other side of it. So thank you again for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.